What happens when a man has everything? A multi-million-dollar tech empire, a beautiful home overlooking the San Francisco Bay, and a brilliant pregnant wife who adores him. For Brendan Cole, it wasn't enough. He craved more, and he found it in the arms of his ambitious subordinate, Kendra Jennings. Together they mocked the woman carrying his child, calling her a domesticated pet who wouldn't know a stock option from a grocery coupon. They thought she would crumble. They thought she would take the hush money and disappear. They made one fatal miscalculation. They never imagined that the woman they tried to break was the same woman who would one day walk into their boardroom, not as a forgotten wife, but as the billionaire investor holding their entire future in the palm of her hand. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's the story of a titan's rise from the ashes of betrayal. The chandeliers at the Fairmont Hotel dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a fractured, glittering light over San Francisco's tech elite. Hannah Foster felt as though she were viewing the scene through a distorted lens. At 7 months pregnant, the sheer weight of the baby seemed to pull her center of gravity down, grounding her in a way that felt alien in this room of high flyers. She smoothed a hand over the bespoke silk of her maternity gown, a deep sapphire that Brendan had picked out. "It makes you look regal," he'd said, a compliment that felt more like a command. Brendan Cole, her husband, was holding court across the ballroom. He was a supernova in a tailored Tom Ford suit, the founder and CEO of Synergy Innovations, a data analytics firm that had become the darling of Silicon Valley. He laughed a deep, confident sound that always drew people in and clapped a venture capitalist on the back. Hannah watched him, a familiar mix of pride and a strange gnawing loneliness filling her chest. She had been there from the start, before the IPO, before the magazine covers back when Synergy was just a concept scribbled on napkins in their tiny Palo Alto apartment. Her background was in computational linguistics and AI ethics, and her early frameworks were the quiet, uncredited bedrock on which Brendan had built his empire. But as the company grew, her role had shrunk first to supportive spouse, then to homemaker, and now to expectant mother. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the back of a velvet chair. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and the cloying scent of champagne, a drink she could no longer have. She needed to find Brendan, to tell him she needed to sit down, maybe even go home. She navigated the clusters of chattering guests, her smile feeling like a mask plastered to her face. She spotted him near the terrace doors, his back to her. He wasn't alone. He was with Kendra Jennings, his vice president of strategy. Kendra was everything Hannah wasn't, at that moment sleek sharp and dressed in a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her ambition was a palpable force field around her. Hannah had always been wary of Kendra, of the way her eyes lingered on Brendan a second too long, the way she laughed at his jokes with a throaty intimacy that felt unprofessional. Hannah paused behind a large marble pillar, gathering her strength before interrupting. And then she heard it. Kendra's voice, a low, conspiratorial murmur. "She looks exhausted, Bren. Are you sure you should have brought her?" Brendan's reply was a low chuckle, stripped of the warmth he performed for the public. "It's good for appearances. The devoted family man. Investors eat that stuff up. Besides, where else would she be? She's got the nesting instinct in full force. I'm surprised she's not at home alphabetizing the spice rack." A cold dread, heavier than her pregnancy, began to settle in Hannah's stomach. This wasn't just office gossip. This was different. Kendra's laugh was sharp, like shattering glass. "God, you're terrible. What does she even do all day? I picture her just waiting for you to come home. It's so quaint, almost tragic." She's useful, Brendan said, his voice laced with a casual cruelty that stole the air from Hannah's lungs. She keeps the house running, plans these boring events. It frees me up to focus on what matters. She doesn't understand our world, Ken. She wouldn't know a Series C funding round from a car payment. She's my little housewife, perfectly content in her gilded cage. The gilded cage. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of Hannah's mind. He saw her as a pet, a decorative, functional object. The dizziness returned with a vengeance, but this time it was laced with the bitter tang of betrayal. Kendra leaned closer, her red lips almost touching his ear. Well, when you're ready to deal with someone who does understand your world, someone who can help you build the empire, not just dust the furniture in it, you know where I am. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Brendan didn't pull away. He placed a hand on the small of Kendra's back, a gesture of casual ownership that was a dagger in Hannah's heart. The room began to spin in earnest. The crystal chandeliers blurred into streaks of painful light. The chatter of the crowd faded into a dull hum. She couldn't breathe. Her hand, which had been resting on her swollen belly, slipped. She tried to call his name, but no sound came out. All she could think of was the phrase, gilded cage. He had built it for her, and she had willingly, lovingly locked herself inside. Her knees buckled. With a soft gasp, Hannah Foster collapsed onto the cold marble floor, the last thing she saw being the horrified, annoyed face of her husband as he turned his hand, still resting on his mistress's back. The scene he so desperately wanted to avoid had just begun, and the woman he had just mocked was at the very center of it. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the cloying opulence of the gala. Hannah woke up to the steady rhythmic beeping of a fetal heart monitor, a reassuring sound that did little to calm the frantic symphony of her own shattered heart. A kind-faced nurse explained that she had fainted from a combination of dehydration and stress. The baby, a boy, was fine, but the doctor warned that she needed to avoid any undue anxiety. It was a laughable, impossible prescription. Brendan was there sitting in a chair by the window, scrolling through his phone. He had perfected the look of a concerned husband for the benefit of the medical staff, but when the nurse left, the mask dropped. "You created quite a scene, Hannah," he said, his voice low and tight with irritation. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't ask about the baby. Hannah stared at him, the man she thought she knew, and saw only a stranger. The fog of shock had receded, replaced by a crystalline Arctic clarity. "I heard you," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "You and Kendra." By the terrace. He had the decency to look momentarily startled, his thumb freezing over the screen of his phone, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive sneer. "Oh, come on. You fainted to get my attention because you overheard some harmless office banter. A bit dramatic, don't you think? You called me your little housewife," she whispered the words tasting like poison. "You called me a pet in a gilded cage." It was a figure of speech, he snapped, finally standing up and pacing the small room. "Don't be so sensitive. Kendra and I were just blowing off steam. This is a high-pressure world, Hannah, a world you've been happy to be insulated from, a world you don't understand." There it was again. You don't understand. The patronizing phrase he used to end any conversation about his business, her ideas, their life. It was a wall he had built between them, brick by condescending brick. "I understand betrayal, Brendan," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I understand being mocked by my husband and the woman he's sleeping with while I'm carrying his child." He stopped pacing and glared at her. The pretense was over. "Fine," he spat. Yes. Me and Kendra. It's been happening for a while. And you want to know why, because she gets it. She's hungry. She's smart. She isn't content to just sit at home and plan dinner parties. She challenges me. What have you done lately, Hannah? Besides redecorate the guest room, each word was a physical blow. The life they had built. The sacrifices she had made, her uncredited contributions. He had erased it all, rewriting their history to cast her as a freeloader. I put my entire career on hold for you, she said, her voice trembling with a rage she hadn't known she possessed. The foundational algorithms for Synergy's core software, the ethical framework that got you your first seed funding from that socially conscious investment firm. That was my work, he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Ideas are nothing without execution, sweetheart. You had some cute concepts, I'll give you that. But I'm the one who built the billion-dollar company. And frankly, you've become a liability. This pregnancy, your constant neediness. You're holding me back. The cruelty was so absolute, so profound, it was almost stunning. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted to annihilate her. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded document, placing it on the bedside table. My lawyer drew this up last week. It's a divorce settlement. It's incredibly generous. You'll have the house in Sausalito, a lump sum that will let you live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you have to do is sign it, along with an NDA, and walk away quietly. No fuss, no mess. He was trying to buy her silence, to package up a decade of her life, and pay it off like a business expense. He thought she was weak, that she would take the money and crumble. And in that moment, seeing the cold, transactional look in his eyes, Hannah Foster died, and someone else was born. She looked at the papers, then back at him. No, she said. His eyes narrowed. What do you mean, no? Hannah, this is the best deal you'll ever get. Don't be stupid. Get out, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. Don't make this difficult. I said, get out. Her voice cracked through the room, sharp and final. For the first time, Brendan looked truly taken aback. He saw something in her eyes he didn't recognize. Not sadness, not desperation, but steel. He snatched the papers off the table. Fine. Have it your way. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. He stormed out of the room without a backward glance. That night, after being discharged, Hannah took a taxi, not to their opulent mansion, but to a small, secure storage unit she had rented months ago under her maiden name, a tiny act of independence she hadn't even known she needed until now. Then she went home. The house was silent, empty. He was with Kendra. She didn't pack clothes. She went straight to his home office. For years, Brendan had brought work home, and for years, she had helped him unofficially. She had copies of early-stage project files, initial code bases, and strategy documents on her old personal laptop, which was stored in the back of her closet. More importantly, she had the original dated digital notebooks from her PhD work, the very notebooks containing the core concepts he had called cute ideas. She wasn't looking for blackmail material. She was looking for proof of her own brilliance. She spent 2 hours methodically copying files onto a series of encrypted hard drives. It wasn't theft, it was reclamation. She was taking back the pieces of herself she had given him. Before she left, she walked into the nursery, a room painted a soft, hopeful yellow. It was a monument to a future that was now a lie. With a tearless resolve, she went back to the kitchen, found the settlement offer Brendan had contemptuously left on the counter, and signed it. She signed her name, Hannah Foster, with a firm, steady hand. Then, underneath her signature, she wrote 3 more words. I reject this offer. She left the document in the center of the vast marble kitchen island where he would be sure to find it. Then, with a small bag and a laptop full of her stolen past and potential future, she walked out of the gilded cage forever, the click of the closing door sounding not like an ending, but like the cocking of a gun. The first few months were the wilderness. The world that had been cushioned by Brendan's millions was suddenly hard and sharp at every edge. As he had threatened, her name was removed from their joint accounts with ruthless efficiency. The credit cards ceased to work. Her friends, the wives of Brendan's colleagues and investors, stopped answering her calls, their silence a clear verdict in favor of the man with the money. Hannah found a small month-to-month rental apartment in a less fashionable part of Oakland, a place with peeling paint and windows that overlooked a brick wall. The contrast with her former life was a daily humbling shock. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion as she navigated the third trimester of her pregnancy, alone. There were nights when fear was a suffocating blanket, when she would sit in the dark, a hand on her stomach, and wonder if she had made a catastrophic mistake. Brendan's words, "You're nothing without me," would echo in the silence. But then the baby would kick a tiny, insistent flutter that reminded her what she was fighting for. This wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about building a world for her son, a world where his mother wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. Instead of wallowing, she worked. Her small apartment became a war room. The encrypted hard drives were her arsenal. She didn't look at Brendan's current company data. That was a legal line she wouldn't cross. She focused only on her own original work from before, and during the earliest days of Synergy, the raw, brilliant concepts he had dismissed. She pored over her old PhD research, the complex algorithms on ethical AI and predictive modeling. She saw it now with fresh eyes, a system that could analyze vast datasets, not for crass commercial exploitation, as Synergy did, but for societal good. It could predict supply chain disruptions, model the spread of diseases, or identify underserved communities for resource allocation, all while using a proprietary ethical framework to anonymize data and eliminate bias. It was the anti-Synergy. She knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed an ally, someone from her past life, the one before Brendan. She thought of Dr. Robert Miller, her former mentor at Stanford. He was a titan in the field of computational linguistics, a man who valued intellectual integrity above all else. Finding his email was easy. Composing the message was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She laid out her situation with clinical honesty, attached a 20-page prospectus outlining her new venture, and hit send with a trembling finger. For 3 days there was only silence. Hannah's hope began to curdle into despair. Then an email appeared in her inbox. The subject line was simple, "Call me RM." Their video call was a lifeline. Professor Miller's face, framed by a chaotic bookshelf, was etched with concern, which quickly turned to academic excitement as she walked him through her proposal. "Hannah, this is the evolution of your doctoral thesis," he said, his eyes alight. "I always told you your work on data ethics was revolutionary. What Cole did, he took the engine of your car and put it in a bulldozer. You want to put it in a starship." He saw her. He saw her mind, her contribution, the very thing Brendan had tried to erase. His validation was the first drop of rain in a long drought. "But Rob," she said, her voice catching, "I have nothing. I'm pregnant, I'm about to be in a nasty divorce, and I have maybe 2 months of living expenses left. Who is going to invest in me? The right people," he said, with a grim certainty. "Silicon Valley is full of sharks like Cole, but there are still a few idealists. People who believe tech should solve problems, not just create new ways to sell ads. Let me make some calls." Professor Miller was a man of his word. He connected her with a small boutique venture capital firm called Tangent Ventures. They were known for backing long-shot high-concept ideas, especially those founded by women and minorities who were often overlooked by mainstream VCs. The pitch was the most terrifying day of her life. At 8.5 months pregnant, she stood before 3 partners in a sparse conference room. She didn't have a fancy presentation or a prototype. She had her laptop, her research, and an unshakable belief in her own work. She didn't mention Brendan or Synergy. She simply laid out the vision for a new kind of data intelligence. She named her company Axiom Dynamics Axiom for self-evident truth. They listened, their faces unreadable. They asked hard, probing questions for 2 solid hours. They challenged her assumptions, they poked holes in her financial projections. Hannah answered every query with the calm, incisive precision of an academic defending her thesis. At the end, the lead partner, a woman named Nina Chen, leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Foster," she said, "this is either complete vaporware or the most important idea that's crossed our desk in 5 years. Your personal circumstances are unconventional. But we don't invest in circumstances. We invest in founders. And you are, without a doubt, a founder." They offered her a seed round. It wasn't a staggering amount, but it was enough. Enough for a small office, a server rack, and to hire a handful of brilliant, hungry coders. It was enough to start. 2 weeks later, Hannah went into labor. She took a taxi to the hospital alone. After 18 hours of grueling labor, she held her son in her arms. He was perfect. He had her eyes. She looked down at his tiny, sleeping face, and the last vestiges of fear and doubt were burned away by a fierce, primal love. She named him Caleb, which meant faithful and wholehearted. Holding him, she knew that this was the true beginning. The pain of the past year hadn't broken her. It had forged her. Brendan had taken her life, and in its place she had created a new one. 2, in fact. Her son and her company. The wilderness was over. It was time to build. The next 5 years were a blur of relentless work fueled by black coffee and a determination that bordered on obsession. Axiom Dynamics was born not in a sleek Silicon Valley garage, but in a cramped rented office space in Berkeley that always smelled faintly of burnt toast from the deli downstairs. Hannah's life became a tightly choreographed dance between motherhood and entrepreneurship. There were days she would code with one hand while rocking Caleb's bassinet with her foot. She conducted investor calls on mute from a park playground, praying her toddler wouldn't choose that exact moment to have a meltdown. She faced down rooms of skeptical men who saw her not as a CEO, but as a mumpreneur, a dismissive label that only hardened her resolve. One investor told her to her face that her family situation presented a significant risk. She thanked him for his time and walked out her mind, already calculating how to make him regret that statement. She built her team carefully seeking out not just talent, but character. She hired Jessica Riley, a whip-smart operations expert who had been pushed out of a major tech firm after reporting a toxic work culture. She hired engineers and data scientists who were disillusioned with the move fast and break things ethos of the Valley people who wanted to build something that mattered. They were a team of underdogs, and they were fiercely loyal to Hannah and her vision. Axiom's breakthrough came not with a flashy consumer app, but with a complex, unglamorous contract with a major international logistics company. Their existing predictive models for supply chain management were failing, costing them millions. Hannah and her team flew in, and within 6 months, Axiom's platform, built on her ethical bias-aware algorithms, had increased their efficiency by 30% and accurately predicted a major port strike that would have crippled their competitors. Word began to spread. Axiom wasn't just another analytics firm. It was a black box that saw the future more clearly than anyone else. They were hired by governments to model public health crises, by insurance companies to create fairer risk assessments, and by non-profits to optimize aid distribution in disaster zones. They were quiet, effective, and increasingly indispensable. Hannah, once the invisible wife, was now the visionary CEO of one of tech's most respected new companies. She never gave interviews about her personal life. She let the work and the rapidly growing valuation of her company speak for itself. Meanwhile, Brendan Cole and Synergy Innovations were on a different trajectory. They were bigger, louder, and far more famous. Brendan was the tech bro king perpetually featured in magazines, with Kendra, now his COO and fiancée, at his side. They expanded aggressively, acquiring smaller companies and launching splashy, data-hungry products that bordered on invasive. But cracks were beginning to show in their foundation. A massive data leak exposed the personal information of millions of users, resulting in a hefty fine. Accusations surfaced that their hiring algorithm was demonstrably biased against female candidates. Their stock, once a rocket ship, began to stagnate. Brendan's strategy was to double down, to push for more growth at any cost, silencing internal dissent and ignoring the warning signs. He and Kendra were blinded by their own arrogance, convinced that their market dominance was unassailable. The divorce had been finalized years ago. Brendan, furious at her refusal to settle quietly, had fought her tooth and nail. But Hannah, with the backing of Tangent Ventures' legal team, had been methodical. She didn't ask for alimony. She asked for something he considered worthless, a formal legal acknowledgement of her intellectual property contributions to Synergy's foundational technology. To end the fight and avoid a messy public discovery process, he'd agreed, laughing with his lawyers, about how his ex-wife wanted credit for some old college papers. It was a footnote in the divorce decree, a tiny clause he would forget almost immediately. But Hannah never forgot. The moment she had been waiting for, the opportunity she had been patiently engineering for 60 straight months, arrived on a Tuesday morning in an email from Jessica Riley. It was an internal market analysis report. Subject: Synergy, Q3 burn rate and investor risk. The report was devastating. Synergy had over-leveraged itself on a reckless acquisition. Its primary institutional investor, a conservative pension fund, was spooked by the ongoing privacy scandals and was threatening to pull its funding. They were bleeding cash, desperately needing a massive new round of investment to stay solvent. They were vulnerable. For the first time in his life, Brendan Cole was in trouble. Hannah read the report, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. She looked at a photo on her desk, a smiling 6-year-old Caleb on his first day of school. Her fight for survival had made her strong. Her work had made her rich. But Brendan's hubris was about to make her a queen. She picked up her phone and called her head of finance. "I want you to get in touch with our contacts at Rothschild & Co." She said, her voice calm and even. "I want to quietly set up a new investment vehicle. A shell corporation. Let's call it Phoenix Capital. It's time to go shopping." The boardroom on the 55th floor of the Salesforce Tower was a shrine to corporate power. A single slab of polished mahogany stretched 30 feet, surrounded by panoramic windows that offered a god's-eye view of the San Francisco Bay. Brendan Cole adjusted his tie, the knot feeling uncomfortably tight. Beside him, Kendra Jennings tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her tablet, her usual icy composure showing the barest hint of a crack. The past 3 months had been a living hell. Their lead investor had pulled out just as Hannah's intel had predicted. The press was circling, sniffing out the story of Synergy's financial distress, They were hemorrhaging talent and teetering on the edge of collapse. This meeting was their last hope. Their investment bankers had arranged it with a mysterious European investment consortium, Phoenix Capital. They were new, aggressive, and had incredibly deep pockets. They had expressed a serious interest in a majority stake in Synergy, a deal that would save the company, and more importantly, save Brendan and Kendra. "They're here," the banker whispered, his face pale with anxiety. Brendan straightened his shoulders, forcing the charismatic, confident smile that had charmed 100 boardrooms. This was his stage. He was Brendan Cole. He could sell anything to anyone. Kendra gave his hand a quick, nervous squeeze. The grand glass doors at the end of the room swung open. 2 people walked in first, a man and a woman in severe dark suits, their faces impassive. They were clearly lawyers or advisors. They moved to the side of the door. Brendan and Kendra held their breath, waiting for the titan of industry, the faceless European billionaire, to make his entrance. And then she walked in. She wore a tailored suit of ivory white, a stark, brilliant contrast to the dark-suited figures around her. Her hair was no longer the soft, long style he remembered. It was cut in a sharp, elegant bob that framed a face that was both familiar and utterly alien. The softness was gone, replaced by a formidable poise. Her eyes, the same deep blue he once knew, now held an unnerving, analytical calm. She moved with an unhurried grace, her heels making a soft, deliberate clicking sound on the marble floor, a sound like a clock ticking down. It was Hannah. Brendan felt the blood drain from his face. A roaring sound filled his ears, and the panoramic view behind her seemed to tilt on its axis. He could feel Kendra go rigid beside him, her sharp intake of breath, a tiny, wounded sound in the cavernous room. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. This was his little housewife, the woman he'd discarded and dismissed standing before him as the potential savior of his crumbling empire. Hannah walked to the head of the table, the seat opposite Brendan, the seat of ultimate power. Her team arranged themselves silently around her. She didn't look at Kendra. She didn't even glance at the terrified bankers. Her gaze was fixed solely on Brendan, and it was as cool and unyielding as the view of the Pacific Ocean behind her. She placed a slim, encrypted tablet on the table in front of her, the movement precise and economical. She looked up, and for the first time, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey after a very, very long hunt. "Brendan?" "Kendra," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of any emotion except a faint, chilling amusement. "It's been a while." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes glittering. "My associates tell me Synergy is looking for an investor. I've reviewed your pitch deck. I have some notes." The word notes hung in the air, weighted with 5 years of silence. 5 years of struggle. 5 years of meticulously planned revenge. Brendan opened his mouth to speak, to protest, to rage, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed. The ghost he had created, the woman he had tried to bury under a mountain of money and contempt, was not only back from the dead, she had come to feast on the ruins of his life. The air in the boardroom was thick with a stunned, suffocating silence. Brendan stared at Hannah, his mind struggling to process the sheer impossibility of the situation. Kendra, for her part, had regained a sliver of her composure, her expression hardening into a mask of defiant fury. "What is this?" Hannah Kendra snapped, her voice sharp. "Some kind of pathetic joke. You set up this charade to what, gloat?" Hannah didn't even turn her head to look at Kendra. She continued to hold Brendan's gaze, a silent, powerful dismissal that was more insulting than any retort. "This is not a joke, Ms. Jennings," Hannah said, her tone as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "This is a due diligence meeting. Phoenix Capital, which I own, is considering an acquisition. So please, let's maintain a professional decorum." She swiped a finger across her tablet, and the massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It displayed Synergy's logo, followed by a slide titled Q3 2025, Financials, an Analysis of Systemic Failure. "Let's begin with your burn rate," Hannah said, and for the next 30 minutes, she conducted the most brutal, systematic corporate assassination the room had ever witnessed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use insults. She used their own data as a weapon, turning their numbers, their projections, and their strategies against them with surgical precision. She pointed out the inflated user engagement metrics they'd used to justify their last valuation. An interesting choice to counter one. 5-second autoplay video scroll as an active engagement. Brendan. Bold. And according to SEC guidelines, borderline fraudulent. She dissected the disastrous acquisition that was draining their cash reserves, highlighting a key vulnerability in the target company's code that her team at Axiom had identified 2 years prior. You paid $500 million for a company with a core security flaw, so fundamental a first-year computer science student could have driven a truck through it. Did anyone on your team even read the source code? She turned her attention to Kendra. A new slide appeared, showing Kendra's signature on a series of financial projections submitted to their investors. "Ms. Jennings, these growth projections for your European expansion. They're based on a market penetration model that completely ignores the GDPR regulations that went into effect last year. This isn't just an oversight. This is either gross incompetence or a deliberate attempt to mislead." "Which is it?" Kendra's face went pale. The bankers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Synergy board members on the video call who had been watching in silence began to murmur amongst themselves. Brendan finally found his voice, a choked, desperate sound. "Stop it, Hannah. This is a personal vendetta. You're trying to destroy me." Hannah finally leaned back, a flicker of something real, not hatred, but a profound, weary disappointment in her eyes. "Destroy you, Brendan. You did this to yourself. You built a company on a foundation of arrogance and unethical shortcuts. It was always going to collapse. I'm just here to watch it happen." She looked around the table at the grim-faced board members. "You see, you have all been laboring under a misapprehension. I am not here to invest in Synergy. An investment would be like pouring water into a sieve. Synergy as it currently exists is worthless." She let that sink in. The silence was absolute. However, she continued, "It has some salvageable assets. Some patents, server infrastructure, a few talented mid-level engineers who aren't culpable in this disaster. Phoenix Capital is therefore prepared to make an offer. Not an investment. A buyout." A new slide appeared. It showed a number. It was shockingly low, just enough to cover Synergy's outstanding debts and allow the board members to escape a tidal wave of shareholder lawsuits, but far from the billion-dollar valuation Brendan had once boasted. It was an offer of corporate extinction. "The terms are as follows," Hannah said, her voice dropping each word, a hammer blow. "We acquire all assets and intellectual property. The Synergy brand will be dissolved. Most of the staff will be let go. And of course, Mr. Cole and Ms. Jennings will be terminated effective immediately. All stock options will be cancelled. No severance. No golden parachute. You will both walk away with absolutely nothing. You can't do that." Brendan roared, slamming his fists on the table. "This company is my life." "You think you can just take it from me? I can," Hannah said simply. "Because the board knows this is their only way out. And because legally, I have a claim you seem to have forgotten." One of her lawyers slid a document across the table. It was a copy of their divorce decree with one small clause highlighted in yellow. The clause where Brendan had years ago laughed as he signed away the acknowledgement of her foundational IP contributions. "My lawyers believe," Hannah said calmly, "that this clause gives me standing to sue Sinner G for years of unpaid royalties and intellectual property theft. A lawsuit that would not only bankrupt you personally, Brendan, but would mire this company in litigation for the next decade. Or the board can accept my very clean, very simple offer. The choice is theirs." The board members on the screen began talking over each other, their decision already clear. They were cutting their losses. They were cutting him loose. Brendan looked at Hannah, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was cornered, humiliated, and beaten. He played his last, most pathetic card. "Hannah, please," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Think about us. Think about our son. Caleb, you're doing this to your own son's father." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Hannah leaned forward, and for the first time her voice was laced with a white-hot fury that made every person in the room flinch. "Do not," she hissed, "ever speak his name in this room. I did not do this to you. I did this for him. My son deserves to have a mother who builds empires, not one who sits by the phone waiting for a man who despises her. I built a future for Caleb on the ashes of the life you tried to burn down." She stood up, her presence filling the room. "You have 1 hour to accept the offer. If I don't have a signed term sheet by then, I walk. And by Monday morning, Sinner G will be a case study in every business school textbook on how arrogance, greed, and underestimating the woman you wronged can lead to utter ruin. Your clock is ticking." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, her team falling in line behind her, leaving Brendan Cole alone in the wreckage of his kingdom, finally truly understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The news of the takeover hit the financial world like a shockwave. "Axiom's Foster Engineers' hostile takeover of ailing Sinner G," screamed the headline in the Wall Street Journal. "Phoenix from the ashes, how Hannah Foster bought her ex-husband's empire for pennies on the dollar." The story was irresistible, a tale of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Hannah was instantly lionized as a new kind of tech visionary strategic patient, and utterly ruthless when she needed to be. She declined every interview request, letting the results speak for themselves. The fallout for Brendan and Kendra was swift and brutal. Stripped of their company, their stock, and their reputations, they became pariahs in the world that had once worshipped them. Their engagement fell apart in a spectacular public fashion, culminating in a shouting match in the street, captured by paparazzi. Kendra, blaming Brendan for his arrogance and for underestimating Hannah, left him. The last anyone heard, she was consulting for a no-name startup in another state. Brendan fared even worse. Drowning in legal fees and personal debt, he was forced to sell the mansions, the cars, the entire facade of his former life. He tried to launch a new venture, but no investor would touch him. His name was toxic, a permanent stain. He had flown too close to the sun, and the woman he'd scorned had melted his wings. He was a ghost in the valley he once ruled, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. One sunny Saturday afternoon, a few months after the acquisition, Hannah was not in a boardroom. She was in Golden Gate Park, pushing Caleb on a swing. He was 7 now, a bright, laughing boy with his father's dark hair and her steady, intelligent eyes. "Higher, Mom, higher," he yelled, his legs kicking with joyous abandon. Hannah smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, Okay, superstar, hold on tight. This was her victory. Not the boardroom takedown, not the headlines, not the billions in her bank account. It was this peace, this freedom, the ability to be present, to push her son on a swing without a knot of anxiety in her stomach, without waiting for a dismissive text or a condescending remark. Later, as they sat on a bench eating ice cream, her COO Jessica Riley sent her a text. Integration of Synergy assets is 80% complete. We've salvaged the core cloud infrastructure and a stellar engineering team from their mobile division. The rest of the toxic code and culture has been purged. What should we do with the old Synergy office building lease? Hannah thought for a moment. Her first instinct was to tear it down to erase every trace of him. But that was his way, not hers. Destruction was easy. Building was hard. She texted back, terminate the lease, and offer generous severance and job placement assistance to every laid-off employee who wasn't in senior management. They didn't build his culture of corruption. Let's give them a chance to build something better elsewhere. It was a business decision, clean and final. Revenge had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited the fire. But the fire itself had become something more. It was about building a company on principles of integrity and respect. It was about creating a legacy for her son. The satisfaction of watching Brendan's world crumble was a fleeting, bitter dessert. The deep, lasting joy came from the empire she had built in its place. She looked at Caleb, who was now chasing a butterfly across the grass, his face a picture of pure, uncomplicated happiness. She hadn't become this powerful, this successful, just to punish Brendan. Her journey had been a fight for survival, for her son's future, for her own right to exist as more than just a footnote. The fact that her path to self-actualization had led her directly through the ruins of his company was simply, as she saw it, a form of cosmic justice. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had betrayed his best asset, and in the ruthless meritocracy of the world they both inhabited, that was the one mistake that could never be forgiven. Her empire was founded on a new axiom: the future is built by those you underestimate. 3 more years passed. The name Synergy was now little more than a ghost, a half-forgotten brand, absorbed into the much larger, more respected entity of Axiom Dynamics. Axiom hadn't just grown, it had fundamentally shifted the landscape of data intelligence. Hannah Foster was no longer just a CEO. She was a thought leader, a philanthropist, and one of the most influential women in global technology. She had established the Caleb Foster Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar initiative dedicated to funding education for underprivileged children and promoting ethical standards in AI development. Her success was no longer a story of revenge. It was a story of transformation. Her life had found a new, calmer rhythm. Her days were a balance of high-stakes board meetings and school pickups. Her evenings were for homework help and bedtime stories, not solitary nights, fueled by coffee and code. Caleb was tenor-kind and curious boy who was proud of his mother, but blissfully unaware of the dramatic specifics of her past. To him, she was just Mom. One crisp autumn afternoon, Hannah was attending a small private tech conference at Stanford University, a return to the place where her intellectual journey had begun. She was the keynote speaker. After her talk, which focused on the future of ethical AI, she decided to take a quiet walk through the familiar campus, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. As she passed by the main quad, she saw a man sitting on a bench, staring at the Rodin sculptures. He was thinner than she remembered, with threads of grey in his once perfectly coiffed hair. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits that had been his uniform. It took her a moment to realize it was Brendan. Her security detail, a discreet man named David, tensed beside her, but Hannah gave a slight shake of her head. Brendan hadn't seen her. He looked diminished. The supernova of charisma had collapsed into a quiet, tired star. Curiosity, not anger or fear, guided her feet. She walked towards him. "Brendan," she said, her voice even. He looked up, and his eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she saw a flash of the old defensiveness, the old anger. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a weary resignation. "Hannah," he said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't used it much that day. "Of course. I should have known you'd be here. Keynote speaker, I assume?" "Something like that," she replied, remaining standing. "What are you doing here?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Looking for a job? A friend of mine is a professor here. He thought maybe there was a research assistant position open. It's not going well. My name isn't exactly a door opener these days." The irony was staggering. The man who had once commanded billion-dollar valuations was now hoping for a university job. "I'm sorry to hear that," Hannah said, and to her own surprise, she meant it. The raging fire of her anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind only the cold embers of a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. He looked at the ground, then back at her. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something raw and honest. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I was wrong. About everything. About you." He shook his head slowly. "I was so blinded by me, by the image, the money. I had this brilliant partner right beside me the whole time, and I was too stupid and too arrogant to see it. I threw away the most valuable asset I ever had. And I'm not talking about the company." He finally met her eyes, and she saw a profound, hollowed-out regret. How's the boy? Caleb is wonderful," she said softly. "He's smart and he's kind. He's happy." A flicker of pain crossed Brendan's face. "That's good. That's all that matters." He stood up, as if her presence was a weight he couldn't bear for long. "Well, I won't keep you. You have empires to run." He started to walk away, a man stripped of everything that had once defined him. Brendan, Hannah called out. He stopped but didn't turn around. "For what it's worth," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I forgive you. Not for you. For me. I let it go a long time ago." He stood motionless for a long moment. Then he gave a single sharp nod and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the sandstone arches. Hannah watched him go, a strange sense of closure settling over her. She hadn't needed his apology, but hearing it had untied a final small knot she hadn't even known was still there. Her revenge had never truly been about his destruction. It had been about her own survival and creation. His downfall was merely the consequence of his own choices. Her success was the consequence of hers. As she walked back to her car, her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Caleb's nanny. He was at his robotics club, holding up a small, clumsy robot he had built his face, beaming with pride. Hannah smiled. That was her empire. That was her victory. Not the company, not the wealth, not the look on Brendan's face in that boardroom years ago. It was the freedom to build a new foundation, one of love, integrity, and purpose. The ghost in the valley was finally gone, and in its place, the future was bright. Hannah Foster's story serves as a powerful real-world reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. She didn't just get even, she got ahead. She transformed her pain not into petty revenge, but into fuel for an empire built on brilliance, integrity, and the sheer unyielding power of a woman underestimated. She proves that your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. While her ex-husband is now a footnote in a cautionary tale, Hannah Foster is busy writing the next chapter of a legacy that will outlive them all. She didn't just reclaim her life, she redefined what was possible. What did you think of Hannah's incredible journey from a betrayed wife to a billionaire titan? Was her revenge justified, or was her success the best revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as inspiring as we did, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true life stories of unbelievable triumph.